minutes, and spoken who wishes to speak. There is no end time limit. I don't anticipate it being as long as Manhattan, but that was 4.5 hours, and we were there for the whole thing, and we listened to everybody. So we're here to listen for the most part, but first I want to give a little introduction about where we're at with the commission. And the first thing to simply say is that the idea of sort of having issues or controversies around public art is not something new in New York City. One example was a sculpture called Civic Virtue, which was outside of City Hall. It was put up by the city in 1922. By the time it was put up, the sort of suffragette women's suffrage movement had been very active, and this work of art, which represents a man standing triumphantly as virtue over some women at his feet representing vice, was seen to be sort of insulting to women. It was quite controversial until the 1940s. It was moved out to Borough Hall in Queens, where it remained controversial until it was moved again to Brooklyn, to Greenwood Cemetery, where it certainly is sitting today, and you can go see it. So that's called Civic Virtue. I just wanted to say this is not something new in New York City to be talking about monuments and representation. It's also not something that's particular to New York City. There are controversies going around the United States a lot. On the left is an image of the Robert E. Lee sculpture in Charlottesville, and on the right is a image of Frank Rizzo, mayor of Philadelphia, which is now under some kind of scrutiny and controversy in the city of Philadelphia, not far from here. So it's happening all over the country, and we are part of that discussion. So what we're talking about here is that the mayor appointed a commission, a 90-day commission, and the idea is the Mayor's Advisory Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers will advise the mayor on issues surrounding public art and historic monuments and markers on city-owned property. And so just monuments and markers and just city-owned property. So we're not talking about street names, we're not talking about school names, and we're also not talking about stuff that's not on city property. So just that's the purview here. It's quite simple. And so by the end of the year, so quite soon, the commission, having listened to the public, and will issue some recommendations. And these are recommendations to the mayor, non-binding recommendations. So just to be clear what a monument and a marker is, on the left is a monument to Joan of Arc. So these are often sculptures of individual people which are on pedestals. And a marker is something like this is a marker to a famous educator in Queens who had a park named after him. So that's what monuments and markers are. And just to be clear also, so we have this commission. The commission will make recommendations. The recommendations go to City Hall, essentially, and the administration makes policy. So then there is an existing process, and this process has been in place for a long time, and this process is not changing. So then, let's say Amy worked at the Parks Department. Let's say there's a recommendation to move a sculpture that's on Parks property. The agency uses the process. Let's say that now there'll be a new process of investigation, historic sort of investigation, comes up with a recommendation, and then, just to be clear, it still goes to a community board meeting and then to the Public Design Commission. So there's two other layers of public input after the mayoral policy is set. So that is the existing policy. The Public Design Commission has been around since the 19th century and is going to continue to be around in the future. Also, just to be clear, this kind of commission is happening in other cities. I mentioned there are controversies in other cities. There are also commissions like this in other cities. And here's just some indications of some of the cities that are currently under this kind of process. So we just wanted to let you know some of the sort of issues that have been coming up and some of the words that keep coming up. So one of in red are some of the ones that have had the most prevalence in our discussions. Historical accuracy, participation in the process has been discussed quite a bit. Power, like who has the power to put up a monument. Complexity, there are very complex histories that we're talking about, that the idea of embracing complexity. We're interested in, or the folks have been talking a lot about inclusivity, and then also possibility. So a lot of the discussion is around taking up or taking down or not taking down individual monuments. There's also the possibility for the future. What about new monuments? What about addition? So a lot of the discussion around this commission has been about the future rather than simply talking about the past and what to do about particular monuments. So here are some of the guiding principles that have been, and this is quite similar to the words that keep coming up again in these public hearings, et cetera. So inclusion, historical understanding, complexity, and reckoning with power and the the idea of who has the power to put something up or take something down. So, and then just to be clear, when we talk about additive, you can talk about in the upper middle, there's this idea of new monuments. There's a monument to Harriet Tubman up in Harlem. It's a new sculpture, but a sculpture on a pedestal, quite similar to the kinds of sculptures on pedestals, which have been this essence of public art for a long time. But there are other kinds of things, like temporary interventions. There's an artist named Edgar Heapofberts on the upper left, who's a Native American guy who's been sort of going around and letting people know, what is the land, a certain nation of Native Americans lived there at a particular time. There's an artist who's an artist in residence at the Department of Sanitation. Her name is Mayoral Euclides. She created at Sanitation a sanitation vehicle covered with mirrors to say, hey guys, let's respect the sanitation workers and thank them for the work they do. When you look at the garbage truck, it's a mirror. It's your garbage, right? So things like that, and she's done parades and stuff like that, which has to do with respect for sanitation workers. There's this idea of an institution being an answer. So if you go downtown to Lower Manhattan in Battery Park, there's the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which is explicitly talked about as a memorial to the Holocaust. So there's educational programming, there's also public dialogue created by artists or created by cities. So there are lots of different ways to think about it, and new monuments is one, but there are also temporary interventions, etc. So we're about to get to the hearing part. We're going to start with our elected officials, and then Nadia will be, this is our first panelist, okay. So just to be clear again, each speaker gets 3 minutes. If you're testifying, you're going to be over on this area here. We're going to call 3 people at a time. And then there's going to be a very loud beep, and we'll ask you to wrap it up at that time. Okay. So if I may ask Senator Diane Savino, Nicole Malliotakis, and Assemblymember Ronald Castrina Jr. to come up as our first panel. Thank you. Okay, and is that mic on? Yeah, go ahead.
It is now.
Very good, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So I guess age has its privilege, so I will go first. Thank you. First, let me just state for the record, I'm sorry,
I must interrupt. I'm very sorry. We do have one more of our commissioners who has just arrived, and I'd like to, I'm so sorry. Okay. But then we can actually officially get started. And thank you, I know you've been rushing over here. Let me just ask John Cavelli to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to say that we probably have a hearing on the traffic on the belt, but that's for another day. My name is John Cavelli. I'm the Executive Vice President for the Wildlife Conservation Society. I am also the chair of what's called the Cultural Institutions Group, which is the organization that helps to coordinate the activities with the commissioner of the 33 cultural institutions that are on city land and in city buildings. Snug Harbor is an example here in Staten Island. I'm also a proud Italian American, so it's great to see such a great turnout. One of my great honors has been to be the vice chair of the National Italian American Foundation, and the button that you see on me represents that I was knighted by the President of Italy. And that holds a responsibility of making sure that we promote strong relations between the U.S. and Italy, and also promoting our common Italian-American heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome, John. Good to see you. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am Senator Diane Savino. I represent the north and east shores of Staten Island and parts of southern Brooklyn. And I want to welcome the commission here. While I respect the members of the commission, I do think yours is a fool's errand in many respects. But I think it's appropriate that you're ending your meetings here on this issue here in the place we affectionately refer to as Staten Italy. It is the place that has the highest population of Italian Americans in any of the counties, possibly in the state. I've spoken about this many times, so I don't have written testimony. I've spoken many places about this issue. Yesterday at the Bronx hearing, there was a petition gathered by some of my colleagues where I participated in the signatures that were gathered for defending the Columbus statue, among other things. So I'm not going to really go into many of the details about that. I want to make a couple of points, though. As it has been said, this is a county that has the highest population of Italian Americans. And so we feel the effects of this commission particularly harshly. And that's partly because Italian Americans, it has not been that long since we were openly discriminated against. And so when the call came for the destruction of that statue, perhaps it sparked some memory among us and what that statue really means. And when that statue was erected, and when that statue was created as a gift to the city of New York by Italian American immigrants, many of whom had scraped together pennies from their pockets to donate to Il Progresso to erect that statue, in an effort to change the narrative about who Italian Americans were, that we were not the great unwashed, that we were not illiterate immigrants, that we were not the people that the New York Times at the time praised when there was a lynching in New Orleans. We were trying to change the narrative that we were in fact scholars, that we were in fact educated, that we were lovers of the arts, that we were explorers, that we were great people, and we wanted to share that history with this city that had shared so much with us. That's what that statue means to Italian Americans. And to hear people speak about our heritage as if it doesn't matter is painful to us. But there's also an opportunity for Italian Americans in this situation, I believe. Because it's been a long time since we truly were openly discriminated against. Because as you see, alongside us here in Staten Island, we are doctors and lawyers, we are senators, we are assembly members, we are the borough president. The governor of this state is an Italian American. The mayor of this city is an Italian American. We are leaders of our hospital system, academics. We are everywhere in this state. And sometimes we forget that it's not that long ago that we were considered the great unwashed, when people celebrated the fact that we were lynched in public. And so maybe out of this, as we reflect on our own history, we'll be a little bit kinder to others who are coming behind us. I hope that's what we've learned from this. But finally, I want to say, we cannot posthumously shaming Christopher Columbus is not going to change history, nor is it going to inform the present. It's not going to do anything but harden people's feelings. And I hope that we don't do that. Italian Americans have a proud history in this city. I know I've run out of time, but I think Frank has a little bit of privilege. I think that we should take this opportunity to keep all of our statues, all of our monuments, and use them for the purpose of educating each other about our unique histories. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me, hold on one second, I'm sorry. What we're asking, I should have said this before, the hearing format, we asked not to have boos and cheers and stuff. If you want to applaud, the way to do it is with the hand gesture. So that's our requests, and thank you very much. Next, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Nicole Maliotakis,
Assembly
member representing Staten Island and Brooklyn. I want to thank the Commission for coming to Staten Island, although I, and I believe many on Staten Island, wish you were coming instead to have a property tax commission, which we believe is something that's more important to be hosting. Let me also mention that the time of day, although we do have a nice crowd here, I believe we would have had a lot more people had this meeting taken place in the evening where many individuals are home from work. And aside from that, since we're expressing people who are offended by things, I want to state that as a daughter of a Cuban refugee, I'm offended that, and I find highly inappropriate that the mayor has named someone to this commission who has called Fidel Castro very heroic, and someone who said the words, if you believe in justice, if you believe in democracy, if you believe in people's rights, if you believe in harmony for all humankind, then you have no choice but to back Fidel Castro. Someone who was very oppressive to not only my family and millions of Cubans and have suffered greatly should not be on this commission to be judging history. And that is Mr. Belafonte. Throughout this administration and others, there have been bridges, schools, ferry boats, streets, all named after those who made significant contributions during our time, whether they be educators, civic leaders, war heroes, and those who gave their lives on September 11th. It's how we preserve their memory and teach future generations of their contributions. How would we feel? How would the mayor feel if a century from now some politicians came along and said that those New Yorkers, those Americans' contributions are no longer significant, an attempt to erase the history we have lived? It is eerily reminiscent of the Soviet Union's attempts to change history by removing images of previous governments, eliminate printed material, and altering photos of historical events. It's called historical negationism, and it's been used by people who want to deny the Holocaust and Japanese war crimes during World War II. There are some who horrifically and unconscionably even want to deny September 11th occurred. And that's why attempting to erase our history is extremely dangerous, and this entire exercise is a slippery slope. This is not just about Christopher Columbus, who discovered the Americas and represents the immigrant experience, and as you heard from my colleague, is so important to Italian Americans across our city and state. George Washington, who was the father of our nation, and who without, we could very well still be living under British rule. Or my personal favorite, Teddy Roosevelt, who was the real progressive leader that I believe every New Yorker should model themselves after. This is about our history as a people, as a society, as a nation, both good and bad, both beautiful and ugly. Let's not rewrite history in the present, just like we don't want future generations to rewrite the reality we are experiencing today. Because it's Christopher Columbus and Teddy Roosevelt who are on trial today, but it can very well be the Statue of Liberty that some will be seeking to remove a century from now. Thank you.
And please, no applause. Thank you. This is good. We see that. And I would thank you also. Very excellent for staying right on time. Thank you so much, Assemblymember.
Good morning, and without any disrespect to the members of the commission, ladies and gentlemen, this is the proverbial dog and pony show put on by the mayor. The fact is that this commission is merely a tool in the cultural and ideological war that exists against everything that the greatest generation fought for and against. And that's something that we need to. So yeah, do the fake clap that they want you to do, but that's the reality. The latest campaign against Gaetano Russo's iconic Columbus statue reveals a hypocrisy and blatant disregard for the very immigrant story that the left claims to champion. A basic understanding of the history behind the Columbus Circle statue bears this out, for it would be inaccurate to assume that the statue was intended simply as homage to a single man. The truth reveals a much richer American success story that should be celebrated. At the turn of the 20th century, Italian immigrants were arriving on the American shores by the hundreds of thousands, seeking a better life and a small piece of the American dream. My ancestors, including my great-grandfather Sebastiano Castorina, immigrated from Giardini, Sicily in 1914, and the ancestors of many of my constituents right here on Staten Island were among them. Sadly, they did not always receive a warm welcome. Italian workmen were the victims of mob violence, while newspapers ran editorials calling Italians sneaky, treacherous, filthy, and descendants of bandits and assassins. Despite challenges and persecutions, Italian Americans like my ancestors never lost faith in the promise of America and the exceptionalism of the society they fought so tirelessly to be a part of. Despite coming here with barely a cent to his name, my great-grandfather opened a grocery store in the East Village to support himself and his family. His success story is one of countless others. By their merits, their achievements, the sweat of their brow, and the fruits of their labor, Italian Americans proved that they deserved a seat at the table and the gratitude of a nation they helped to build, brick by brick, rivet by rivet. From the Empire State Building to the Verrazano and Brooklyn Bridges, Grand Central Station, and the frescoes that beautify our nation's capital, Italian Americans played a profound role in constructing some of our most famed architectural achievements. Undeterred and undaunted by the slights and setbacks they suffered, and fiercely proud of their accomplishments in the face of such adversity, the Italian Americans of New York donated the iconic sculpture to the city of New York in 1892 on the 400th anniversary of Columbus's discovery as a gift to their adoptive homeland. To represent their pride, they chose Cristoforo Colombo, an Italian explorer from Genoa. Not a perfect man with a spotless legacy, but the man himself is less important than what the monument symbolizes. That Italians from Columbus to Amerigo Vespucci, whose name would become the inspiration for the name of America itself, had paved the way for the founding of the greatest nation on earth. For the earliest Italian Americans, the statue of Christopher Columbus in Columbus Circle was a token of appreciation to the Americans who had embraced them and a tribute to Italians who sacrificed to earn their place in American society. At the end of the day, we cannot bow to reactionary backlash against the despicable demonstrations in Charlottesville by throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Now is the time for mature leadership, for cooler heads to prevail, and for us to acknowledge that no historical figure is without flaws, failings, or moral shortcomings. The essential thing to consider is what lies at the core of our motivations for idolizing imperfect historical figures who nonetheless made profound contributions to our society. In Columbus's case, a true understanding of the history behind the statue reveals the proud and inspirational immigrant success story of the Italian people in America. Coming from a political party that claims to champion the immigrant cause, the left should be the first ones to line up and defend Columbus's statue, especially after having no qualms about marching in the Columbus Day Parade when campaign season comes around. With all these issues surrounding our great city, homelessness, traffic, taxes, the opioid epidemic, and countless others, New York tax dollars should be allocated to more pressing issues than this commission and this folly. Thank you.
Please, again. Great, very good. Thank you. In which area? Okay, thank you. The next three is David Carr, Frank Santarpia, and Peter Guid. Okay. So, and again, I'm going to ask you guys to please stay to the 3 minutes, and go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Carr, and I'm Chief of Staff to New York City Council Minority Leader Stephen Matteo, who represents the 50th District here in Staten Island, and I read this testimony into the record on his behalf. Members of the Commission, I think I speak for many of my friends, neighbors, and constituents when I say that I am completely opposed to what appears to be the mission of this body. The notion that city government may seek to sanitize our history by removing monuments of figures that are distasteful to some in today's society is misguided. The history of our country and our city is as complex as the lives of the people who lived it. Alongside their great accomplishments, many of those enshrined in our city's monuments had characters or beliefs or undertook actions that today would be called into question, even considered repugnant. Allowing them to remain is not an endorsement of these individuals, but rather a testament to the views and values of those that came before us. They are literal benchmarks in our progress as a people. We can acknowledge that today many of the monuments we currently have would not be erected, but removing these statues does nothing to erase the wrongs of the past. It will only serve to remove from the public consciousness the history that brought us to our present times. Yes, that history is messy, it can be ugly, it is certainly not easy. But most importantly, history is also instructive. Let these statues stand so that they may educate those who pass by about our true history, rather than shoving it into the closet to be forgotten. Moreover, many of these monuments have taken on a new life and meaning as time has elapsed. The statue of Christopher Columbus in Columbus Circle does not celebrate the man as much as the people he represents. The Italian-American community had to struggle for acceptance in this country for years, and in some ways anti-Italian and anti-Catholic views are still present in our culture. However, this monument was erected due to the efforts of a proud, hard-working people who felt that they had carved for themselves an important place in this country. To take it down would be a great injustice and insult to a community of which I am proud to be a part. In summation, I support efforts to place statues in their historical context, but I cannot support the removal of statues from our city. I ask that the Commission make no recommendation for removal of these monuments, and in particular the statue of Christopher Columbus in Columbus Circle. Thank you.
Thank you. Please note that. Thank you. Very excellent. Thank you.
My name is Frank Santarpia. I am the Senior Advisor to Staten Island Borough President James Otto, and I read this testimony on his behalf. When I sat down to compose the testimony I would present to the Mayoral Advisory Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers, it occurred to me that despite the tremendously important work this commission is doing, perhaps the time and efforts donated by such distinguished individuals might have been put to better use. After all, why is studying art, monuments, and markers deserving of a commission when so many other issues were deemed to be unworthy of such study? Several come to mind. Why has the leaky 5-borough fast ferry service morphed into a 4-borough fast ferry service, excluding only Staten Island? Last I looked, we were still considered a borough of the city of New York, although historically we've often been treated as a BINO, a borough in name only. We find this inattention to our borough's lack of transportation alternatives to be highly offensive. Why is this issue unworthy of a distinguished commission? While we are on the subject, why not broaden our perspective to the hellish commute endured by Staten Islanders in general? Which commission is studying our now way too often 2-hour commutes at the start and end of each workday? We also find it highly offensive that the DDC, which ostensibly is an acronym for the Department of Design and Construction, but which in reality stands for Delay, Dishearten, and Confound, is able to get away with project cost overruns stretching into the tens of millions of dollars and estimated completion dates delayed by years and years. Why is there no mayoral advisory commission to make recommendations about the black hole that is the DDC? In principle, I believe such a commission should study whether or not the agency should exist at all. And what distinguished body studies possible solutions to the problem of newly paved streets being dug up by utilities and other contractors and patched up in a substandard manner? If you know of any commission studying this very real problem, which offends us on a daily basis, please let me know. Which commission is studying the need to return to teaching civics in our schools? And where's the Mayoral Commission on Sandy recovery? And I don't mean the one that has essentially been contracted out to the City Council. Which commission is studying Staten Island's curiously high cancer rates? Oh, that's right. New York State just announced they have created one after the city never responded to Councilman Joseph Borelli's request. However, we are not here to address commissions which do not exist but should. Rather, we are here to testify before a commission that should not exist, but does. Monuments and markers are testaments to our history, good or bad, like it or not. They are made of metal or stone or concrete and possess neither a voice nor a soul. Why are we so bent on destroying inanimate objects that neither espouse nor decry any philosophy, but simply remind us that such a person or such a time existed at some point in our country's history? Does taking down a monument mean that the deeds or misdeeds of an individual never existed? I believe we cannot and should not attempt to whitewash our history. What we were, and what we are, we are. I see monuments as part of the timeline of our great history and a much-needed reminder of what and who we once were and just how far we have come. I also believe that commissions such as this are capable of creating more division within our city than any monument or marker ever could. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Peter.
My name is Peter Junta, and I am Deputy Chief of Staff to Councilman Joe Borelli. Unfortunately, Councilman couldn't be here today, so I'm reading a statement from him. I would like to begin by welcoming members of the Commission to Staten Island for this morning's public hearing. While the purpose of this commission is viewed as controversial to some, I believe that the outcome of these hearings and the decisions made by the Commission will be a defining moment in the history of our great city that will be judged upon decades from now. This statue represents the hard work and steadfast determination of millions of Italian Americans. I cannot, in good conscience, turn my back on the generations that have come before me and to whom this statue means a great deal. Of course, I understand the outcry, and I ask that those who are offended by the actions of this man consider the actual meaning of this statue. To your Italian American neighbors and friends, it serves as a tangible symbol of the legacy of generations of Italian Americans who arrived in this country with very little, and through diligence and undying persistence, were able to make lives for themselves and their families in the United States, and who contributed in a meaningful way to this country. I don't know of any Italian American who stands by the actions of Christopher Columbus in the 16th century, but I know of many who consider this statue to be a source of pride and a perpetual reminder of the difficulties faced by Italian American immigrants and their triumph over them. To early 20th century Italian immigrants, so many of whom are the parents and grandparents of many of my constituents, the statue of Christopher Columbus in Columbus Circle cemented their place in American society at a time when they were discriminated against and not yet accepted as true Americans. I ask that the Commission consider these points and not rush into a decision without fully understanding the contemporary meaning of the Columbus statue, which is not to glorify an individual person, but an entire group of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next group, please. No plus. Thank you very much. Okay. Carol Purley Plum, Frank Lorenzo, and Vincent Keep And sir, you are?
Frank Lorenzo from the Italian American One Voice Coalition.
Great. And is Vincent here? And Carol Purley Plum, are you? Yes.
I'm a member of the Staten Island Historical Society.
Great.
Hockenville Historical Society's National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could take. Yes, thank you. Okay. So Frank, would you like to? And is Vincent here? If not, I'm going to call Peter Killen.
Yes.
Could you? Okay, you join this one. Thanks. We'll see if Vincent comes. Okay, you're up, Frank. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Frank Lorenzo, and I'm here today representing the Italian American One Voice Coalition. We are working with about 50 Italian American organizations across the tri-state area. Removing or altering Columbus statues or renaming Columbus Day is unconstitutional. The very definition of liberty means to act freely without oppressive government restrictions being imposed by authority. Italian Americans can freely celebrate their holiday, which is practiced through cultural symbols and parades named after Christopher Columbus. We firmly believe that diversity of opinion matters, but inflammatory language, destructive vandalism, and intentional deprivation of civil rights does not fall into that category. Evidence indicates that local governments are formulating policies, practices, and customs with discriminatory animus. Inflammatory statements made by City Council members and Mayor de Blasio and the creation of this commission to review cultural symbols is a pattern of deliberate indifference towards clear violations of our civil rights. There are groups in New York State and around this country that are lobbying local government officials to strip Italian Americans of their cultural symbols, customs, and civil rights. They are highlighting historical grievances and are openly advocating for modern-day institutional discrimination against us. This is quite disturbing because mayors and council members are embracing it with open arms. May I remind those watching, which includes members of this commission, that local governments are prohibited by federal laws from discriminating against groups' national origin, which includes ancestry and culture. In addition, New York State human rights law also prohibits discrimination based on national origin. So how can Italian Americans participate in the cultural life of the state if this administration seeks to remove our cultural symbols from city property? Highlighting historical grievances while lobbying local government to strip us of our civil rights is targeting us based on our ancestry and national origin. With all this information, Italian Americans in New York City and all across this country should be asking themselves the following questions. Where is our equal protection? Does the 14th Amendment not apply to us? Why is our ancestry and culture being targeted? My friends, this is not an example of inclusion, but of exclusion. Italian American immigrants contributed to the cultural life of the state like every other ethnic group in New York City. If you remove or alter our immigrant symbols or rename holidays, you are sending a message to all potential immigrants that their struggle doesn't matter and that New York City will not recognize their cultural contribution to the city. We must all work together to ensure that these discriminatory practices end here in New York City. Local government should not be acting under the color of law to seek to deprive us of our federally protected rights on behalf of other groups. Therefore, since New York City does not care about Italian American civil rights, I am respectfully requesting federal intervention by the Attorney General's Office of Civil Rights Division, and in addition, the New York Division of Human Rights should create an advisory council, which it has the power under Section 295, Paragraph 8, to investigate the institutional discrimination and collusion occurring against Italian Americans in New York City. Now, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Peter? Next? Okay. Carol is next. Speak right into the mic, please.
How many members of the commission are there?
We're here to listen to testimony. We're here not to have a, sorry.
Well, it would be nice.
I will tell, okay.
All right. There's a saying.
Please speak right into the mic, right? You got to put it right
There,
up.
is that better?
There, that's good. Thank you very much.
Okay. There's a saying that those that refuse to learn their history are condemned to repeat the mistakes. And I add to that. I think that depriving children, grandchildren, and generations to come of knowing something about the obstacles that their ancestors faced in becoming full-fledged American citizens would be a shame. And that could happen if we arbitrarily remove all statutes that offend somebody. And these statutes that offend us now may be certainly acceptable 50 years, and anything that we put up, how do we know that people 50 or 60 years will want to keep them? Now, Christopher Columbus inherited the world he was born into. It was a violent age. Christopher sailed off beyond the horizon when most people thought the world was flat. So it was hard for him even to get a crew together. Now, Christopher Columbus made 4 voyages to the New World. He never set foot on the American continent. His 4 voyages all were on islands in the Caribbean. He never met or hurt or did anything to a Native American. He met the Arawak Indians who lived on Caribbean islands and in the northeast corner of South America. They were free, they ruled the islands, and they were some fierce fighters. When we say that Columbus killed some of them, heck, yeah, there were battles galore, and they killed some of Columbus's men also. We should think of that and really not replace. Now, even though we may not replace, we can add additions. There are a number of people that I can think of, and I'm sure there are people you can think of. We could have a competition so that people could nominate a painting, a sculpture, in today's world, maybe a video or a light show. And some of the people that I think of, the lion of the abolitionist movement, Frederick Douglass. He published a newspaper, the North Star. Oh, let me finish this, huh? All right. He also encouraged 2 women who initiated the right for women to vote, which took 72 years. So it wasn't just like somebody said, oh, let the lady vote. And that was Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Now, my personal favorite to be commemorated would be Francois Joseph Mangin. He was an immigrant from France by way of the West Indies, and he started an architectural firm in New York about 1810. He designed the City Hall. He designed City Hall, which thank God we have kept, and it's one of the most beautiful buildings in the city. Now, who else? And,
Please, if you can wrap it up. We have a lot of people here, and we're going to be here all day.
Let me After the Civil War, there was a series of reunions between the former Confederate and the former Union soldiers. And at these reunions, which lasted for something like 70 years until the soldiers died, these former bitter enemies would embrace, they'd reminisce, they became comrades.
Thank you, Carol.
Now,
we really have
okay,
to stick to please.
if they could move forward for a common cause, so
Thank
can
you very
we.
much. Okay, thank you. Peter, please, no clapping, please. Peter, you're up. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Peter Killen, and I'm glad that you're here today. The Mayoral Advisory Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers. I'm glad you're here, but I'm wondering where the City Council people are who put you together. They should be here too. In Sunday's New York Times on November 19th of 2017, in an opinion article, Sarah Vole wrote, "Just as citizens suspected of conspiring with foreign governments should be investigated and prosecuted in the present, those who committed treason in the past need not be glorified. What could be more logical than taxpayers' patriotic plea that their federal, state, and municipal governments consider removing from public property tributes to traitors loyal to the Confederate States of America who took up arms against the United States to perpetuate the institution of slavery." And that was in the November 19th New York Times. I cannot agree more. After Charlottesville, Virginia, the UN cry was to remove the statues of traitors of the United States of America, Robert E. Lee being one of them. I cannot agree more. In Brooklyn, at the Fort Hamilton Army Base, if you must do something, and I heard you do not remove road signs, but then change the name of the street bearing Lee's name. There is a street named for Robert E. Lee at Fort Hamilton Army Base. In today's world, with misdirection everywhere, for our city council to listen to Donald Trump and to change the conversation away from traitors to everyone else is surely criminal. Do not take down the art, monuments, and markers of our past. Add new ones that glorify who we are as a nation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call the next three, which is Joe Pasilla, Edward Robusto, and Richard Connolly. And I just want to make one note. We're only talking about stuff on city property. So stuff, Port Hamilton's not city property, so we wouldn't be addressing that. Just to clarify, city property, only monuments and markers. Okay, thank you.